I have decided to make another little video. I've gotten a few more books down. Not down, but I read a few more books recently and I decided to talk about them. A couple of them are actually fairly uncommon or rare, so this video may be worth something. It's nighttime, so I'm just going to do a voice recording and have some nice visuals. So in chronological order, the first book, or the earliest one I read, is Suicide by Edouard Leve. And pretty much the reason I decided to read that one is because I was thinking about partially the idea and then the act itself of suicide, so I figured there wouldn't be a better book to read on the subject than one titled that. So, and it's also very short. I think it's 80 pages or something. And I really enjoyed it. The idea behind the book is it's the author who is not necessarily Edouard Leve, but the author is imagining a friend that killed himself 20 years ago. And it is all written to the friend. Like, one example maybe, and I'm just making this up, but it's pretty similar to the style of the book. You used to sit in your room on summer weekends and read the dictionary, turning to random pages, reading the definitions out loud, and creating your own narrative, because you thought that even a narrative such as that was as good as any. Or something like, you used to walk around a mall after declining a party with your friends and picking out interesting characters among the random faces in the crowd and inventing little stories for them, or something like that. It's always like, you used to do this, or you would, or something like that. And I think it was really precious in that way. And incidentally, the author I read killed himself 10 days after sending that book to the editor or the publisher. And another odd coincidence, and odd coincidences seem to be fairly common. Cesare Pavese, he had a little sort of literary diary going on, and I recently bought that and have been reading excerpts from it, picking up at random and turning to a random page. And at the very end, it says, "I will write no more." And that is dated 9 days before he decided to kill himself. So there must be something with this, okay, I'm done writing, and then you have about 10 days. So you should never stop writing. And after Suicide, during it, but I finished The Art of Flight by Sergio Pitol. And it's basically a memoir about the Mexican author. And I found him from Valeria Luiselli. She said he is the best Mexican author alive today. Unfortunately, he has a cognitive disease where he can no longer communicate with language, which is almost like, Beethoven. He had a life of music, and he could no longer hear, although he could still create it. but Sergio Pitol, he can no longer communicate with language. But this Art of Flight, it's a 3-part thing. And it was recently published by the Deep Vellum Press in Dallas, Texas, which is pretty close to me, and that's really awesome. Translations, everyone knows that they're not very common in the U.S., and if everything goes to plan, I'll be able to help with that. But it starts out just talking about memory, and he more or less, that's his life section, like where he talks about his actual physical life and where he travels and who his friends are, his different jobs, why he lived where he did, and it's really interesting. And the main thing that I got out of it was learning other authors, because he knew everyone. He knew every Mexican author that did anything. I mean, there's always going to be the guy who got bad luck and no one liked him or something, but as far as like Octavio Paz and Carlos Fuentes, he knew there's this relatively famous Mexican called Carlos Monsiváis. They're best friends, actually. He knew everybody. And also, he knew many people in Italy, Portuguese authors, Polish authors, French, English. And it's just really amazing how many people he knew. But one of the most interesting books that I heard of from that section is The Gates of Paradise. And I do not know how to say this Polish guy's name, but it's Jerzy, Andrze, Jeweski, something like that. The Gates of Paradise. It was originally in Polish, and it was translated into English, but it is not on Amazon, and it is not on Abe Books. But there is actually one in a library near me, about 200 miles away, so maybe one of these days. But the book is about the Children's Crusade, I think like in the year 1212, a long time ago. There were some children that decided to try to claim the Holy Land. And it follows the child who started it all, who got a calling from God to, kill people for God. And then it follows the kids who went with him. And this is all because Sergio Pitol quoted some of the book in his memoir. So this is what it told about. But apparently the one guy who decides to go, a girl likes him, so she goes. And then there's this other boy that likes the girl, so he goes. And then there's an adult that kind of supervises the whole thing. And there's this one section in it. I don't think I'll be able to find it, but maybe I'll add an addendum to this or something. But it was a very good section, and it reminded me of Blood Meridian, because it was a very pessimistic section, saying that people are inherently violent, and the only way to get away from violence is to become completely isolated. But becoming isolated will more or less make you go crazy and then force you to commit violence. And it wasn't necessarily outward violence, but I believe this is after World War II. This book was written. I believe it was written in the 50s. So, and that sort of idea also ties into one of the other books I'll talk about, the next one. And the second part of The Art of Flight, which also could have been translated as The Art of Fugue, like Bach's famous piece for harpsichord, pieces for harpsichord. The second part is about writings. He wrote a lot. He did translations. He did memoirs, of course. He did novels. I'm not sure if he ever did poetry, but he pretty much did everything. And he talks about how he got into writing, what he wrote about, his process for writing. He gives some journal entries as he was writing a book, and he gives a general chronology of one of his books. He has a Carnival trilogy, I believe it's called. I can't remember the first title. I can't remember the first title, but it's a Carnival trilogy anyway. And it took him, I think, a year and a half to write, and he gives journal entries for like 1 month, from the very beginning, and then 1 month until the very end when he's finished and sends it off. And it won some prize that year, Heralde Prize or something like that. And the reward for the prize is that he got it published. So, and that in itself was interesting, hearing how he writes, because he's obviously a very popular and worth reading author. So I learned a little bit, to say the least. And then the third section is about readings, and that was also a very interesting section, because pretty much all of it was about books I have not read yet. Like The Good Soldier Svek by Jaroslav Hasek or something like that. It seems like I haven't read Catch-22, but Catch-22 is ubiquitous in our culture, so it's as far as I can tell, it's about the same thing. A really dumb guy who could also be construed as smart goes around annoying people and being like a Don Quixote sort of character. And he talks about he actually does a whole section on a comic book writer. And I thought that was interesting, because from everything else he says, he's, a very intelligent reader, and comic books may not be the height of intelligence. That's not to say they are necessarily bad, but they're almost always much easier than something else. And as I learn Spanish better, I plan on reading his stuff. And then the third final book that I completely finished, is The King of the Storeroom by Antonio Porta. It's an Italian novel, and it was translated by Lawrence Smith. And it was published by the University Press of Wesleyan University. And its general premise, and I heard of it from a thread on the internet about post-apocalyptic novels. And I'm very grateful that whoever mentioned it did mention it. And the general idea of it is, an event has recently depopulated the earth, and well, at least Italy, and has pretty much ruined civilization and culture as it is. And it has spiraled into a World War II scenario with genocides and propaganda covering deaths up, people killing each other for food, that sort of thing. And it's from the perspective, first person perspective, of an older man who has had a lifetime of writing and earns food by either writing like histories down for people of their family and themselves, or writing letters for people, or he just entertains them with stories and they give him food for their entertainment. And it's a losing proposition, but the story is mainly filled with, I would say, like, just poetic musings, I guess. I don't really like that word, but just poetic ways of saying things. One of the examples he gives is he's generally against capitalism, and that's a fairly obvious part of the book. But he says at one point there is a suitcase full of poop and it smells bad. But then it turns into a suitcase full of gold and it smells even worse. And I thought that was just a pretty funny short illustration of his opinion on the matter. And then I'm going to read one section here. All of the sections go by days, but this one doesn't have a number on it. I imagine that this is a holiday, out of the usual calendar, having freed itself from the necessary sequence. I wash up and change clothes and start to write a poem dedicated to Scardanelli. Where the tangled threads split, there are gods. Where cracks in the ground gather seeds, the gods are there. At the point of disorder, of the infinite possibilities of decision, there are gods. Inside the green fuse already lit in the ice, protected by fuzzy down, inside the heavy buds ready to explode, live the gods. Where the river plows the earth and returns on itself, in the sound of pebbles grinding on one another, where a root breaks through and drinks, when the field worked by men and machines begin to leaven, then the gods give off their scent. Even those that were called celestial, the carriers of oxygen, navigate among us. Is there a limit to the earth? No, there isn't. Not even the celestials believe there is. And limits, they dare joke, don't wear clothes. When a man enters a room and takes in his hand the objects he finds on the table or credenza, and throws them on the floor, grabs well-cooked food and throws it out the window to the dogs, the gods have wished it so. In their cruelty, unemotional by definition. Where there is weariness, the gods are absent. When you prepare to settle accounts with the lords of the earth, the gods sharpen weapons and give them to you. They weave heavy hemp ropes. They point out trees to the people, who spread out like a fan, who surge forward. The gods blow at your back. Winds become favorable, friction decreases. The velocity of impact is like a gunshot right between the eyes. Man lives poetically. The gods shape their lips into a kiss. The climax of the kiss is that half of the afternoon when the festival declines and disappears. The numerical series and obligatory sequence returns, and I have to get ready. With the last light I must transcribe. And then there's a letter here. It was the 30th of last month when I wrote you that a few people were quietly saying the word genocide, and today, which is the 30th of the next month, for the first time a nationally distributed newspaper of secular opinion printed the taboo word in big letters, genocide, to tell us what's been happening for a month at Tel al-Zatar, where there's been no water for a week. You ask me, why did they let 30 days go by before they decided to use the word that best reflects the intention? Because by now the genocide is complete, or at least they hope so, and thank God for the earthquake in China to busy us, with relief for the Chinese, and to remove even the images of the wounded left there to die, of several pipelines of pregnant women pursued to make sure they never have babies again. If I look into the leaves of the giant alder, elbows on the windowsill, the spaces between the leaves fill up with torn, ghostly sheets. That's one section of it. I really love post-apocalyptic novels. Good ones, at least. Like Earth Abides, Alas Babylon, On the Beach, The Road, and then The King of the Storeroom. They're all very good. I don't know quite why I like them so much, but I do. And then I think I'll end it by reading a little bit of poetry by Cesar Vallejo. I'll read it in English. This is from his first collection, The Black Heralds, Los Heraldos Negros. There are blows in life so powerful, I don't know. Blows as from the hatred of God, as if, facing them, the undertow of everything suffered, welled up in the soul. I don't know. They are few, but they are. They open dark trenches in the fiercest face and in the strongest back. Perhaps they are the cults of barbaric Attilas, or the black heralds sent to us by death. They are the deep falls of the Christs of the soul, of some adored faith blasphemed by destiny. Those blood-stained blows are the crackling of bread burned up at the oven door. And man, poor, he turns his eyes, as when a slap on the shoulder summons us, turns his crazed eyes, and everything lived wells up like a pool of guilt in his look. There are blows in life so powerful, I don't know. And there's one other one I really like. So I can find it pretty quick. All right. And this one, I don't really know how to say it in English, but Epexegesis. I was born on a day when God was sick. Everybody knows that I am alive, that I am bad, and they do not know about the December of that January, for I was born on a day when God was sick. There is a void in my metaphysical air that no one is going to touch, the cloister of a silence that spoke flush with fire. I was born on a day when God was sick. Brother, listen, listen. Okay, and do not let me leave without bringing Decembers, without leaving Januaries, for I was born on a day when God was sick. Everybody knows that I am alive, that I chew, and they do not know why in my poetry galled winds untwisted from the inquisitive sphinx of the desert screech an obscure coffin anxiety. Everybody knows, and they do not know that the light is consumptive and the shadow fat, and they do not know how the mystery synthesizes, how it is the sad, musical humpback who denounces from afar the meridional step from the limits to the limits. I was born on a day when God was sick, gravely. I may have read that on this channel before, but I can't stop thinking about those two. It's just amazing. And also a couple days ago, I read some Middle English stuff, and the one that I thought was most precious was there's a poem called Pearl, and the author is anonymous, so they just call him the Pearl Poet. But that poem, The Pearl, it has a line that is repeated like a refrain, and I don't know how to say it in the Middle English, but translated into modern day English, it's something like, "My secret pearl without a spot." And I just think that's such a nice image that could be used for almost anything. It could be used for a secret love you hold for someone, or it could be your unblemished idea of a dream you have, or a poem that you can't stop thinking about. My secret pearl without a spot. Yeah. Well, I think these get longer and longer as I go, but hopefully they're enjoyable to somebody. Goodbye until next time. Here's the Gates of Paradise, the quote that I couldn't find. "It's no use," Alexis Mellison confesses, attributing these thoughts to his adopted father. "All is vain apart from shame and prejudice. The satisfaction of the senses does not still desire and lust, for as soon as one desire is satisfied, 100 others awaken even more imperiously. Actions born of the purest desires end in remorse and infamy, and perhaps there are no desires. The need for violence and cruelty takes possession of man's nature. He flees from it in a trembling and shame-filled solitude. Then, drawn back once more into the ravening pack, driven by folly and the furies of physical strength, again he goes murdering and violating right and left, until the moment of awakening arrives, and then man finds himself once more alone in his solitude, but because of the criminal gravity of his folly, even more solitary than before, and in that absolute solitude, in the person of his flesh and spirit, he searches desperately and in vain for some way out. But there is no way out. He snatches blindly and vainly at what appear to be promises of salvation, but he can forget himself only in violence, a violence bereft of illusions, naked and black as hatred.